Welcome to Turning Pages, a series of in-depth conversations with authors about their works.
All right, well, it is a curated history of the Toronto Blue Jays, the franchise, Keegan Matheson's book out now, and he joins me on the program. Welcome to the show, Keegan.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you on. Now, I'm very curious about process. This is one of the things I like to talk to authors about. You are a beat reporter for MLB.com covering the Jays, and so I'm very curious about what transfers over in terms of writing skills and styles, and like, are they two completely different beasts, or did you find that you had some stuff in the bag in terms of like how you approach things for a piece that you could use for the book?
Yeah, I love this question because I had to learn along the fly on this one because it's so strange. If I was writing a book about farming or basketball or cars, that's different than my day-to-day job. But this is the same topic through a completely different process, which I think made it even stranger for me. And the first thing I had to battle with was patience. And I don't think I got all the way there, I'll be honest. But when I am with the Blue Jays day to day, like right now I'm in Chicago, I'll be back in Toronto with them soon. When I'm with the team, I show up to work, do 2 or 3 interviews, write a story, and boom, there's 800 or 1,000 words online for people to read right away. And it's instant gratification. And then the next morning comes and we all forget that story existed and we move on to the next one. This one was so much slower. It was, for context for people listening, probably a year and a half from when I signed the contract at the end of 2023 until it was published in June 2025. And that was such a mental shift for me. And I'm used to writing longer form stories. So early on, I tried to look at this as, okay, you're going to write 30 or 35 really big stories. But I also didn't want it to be completely bogged down with reporting, and I didn't want everything to be traditional journalism long form. I wanted some of them to be more essay style, a little more on the writing side. So it took some mental stretching, I guess, and I did not nail it early on. I'll tell you what, and I think I got better at it as we went, but it was really difficult at first because I thought it would be the same thing in my brain. I thought it would be the same part of my brain, and it was not. My goodness. So I think I'm better for it, for having stretched out that part of writing and that part of reporting. But it was a strange thing to do, so similar to my day-to-day job, and I'm so close to the Blue Jays every single day. But this book was just an inch to the left, and that was a challenge early on. It really was, but part of the fun as well. Kind of once I got my head around it.
End up swinging at pitches in the dirt.
Yeah, a few of them. I ended up taking a few too many pitches early on. I think the first couple of months between this problem that we're kind of talking about now and the question of what do I include, because if I had written this book in 1985, that would be easy. Okay, 30 things have happened with the team. I'll write those. But we're close to a half century of the Blue Jays. So deciding what to include in the book was the other part. So I think I spent a lot of time staring at a screen. At the time, I think I lied to myself and told myself I was planning, I was workshopping ideas. I think I was just staring at a screen for a while, but thankfully I got going eventually.
Yeah, as I mentioned, obviously the subtitle's curated history, and so that suggests, like some editorial thought as to kind of what is included, that this isn't everything, and you're picking your spots. And so I guess that leads to the next question, which is like, did you have, an editor or a set of outside eyes that helped you figure out kind of what was included, what you were kind of not including, or did you trust your gut in terms of like, here's how I'm going to shape this?
Most of this was from my side, and I had a great editorial team at Triumph Books who I was able to bounce ideas off of, and also some writers who I work with at MLB.com who have done books before, who were there to listen to me, and were able to listen to me when I said, I'm thinking of doing X, Y, and Z. Is that crazy? And they'd say, no, Keegan, you're overthinking it, and I would move on. But I did have some great resources there. And the word curated, like you mentioned, that was the important part for me, because if this was to be a full history book, it would be either 10,000 pages or really boring, way too short and surface level. So there had to be some decisions made. And some of those were personal decisions based on the stories I wanted to tell, but also the stories I thought that I could best tell. And it was important to strike a balance as well between necessary stories and ones that I wanted to add to what's out there, because I work on a Blue Jays beat with other writers who have written books about this team, and there have been 100 writers before me who have covered the Blue Jays and written important, incredible stories. So I wanted to add something of my own. And you can't write a book like this without writing about Joe Carter and the bat flip. I've done that a million times. You cannot do this without writing about Jose Bautista. And those big moments need to be in this. But on top of that, there need to be 6, 8, 10 chapters of stuff that I've experienced, stuff that is new, and I hope adds to readers' experience, adds to kind of the lexicon of what's already out there. And I hope that's what gives the book some life and makes it not just a retelling of history, but something that can add to an already really big, really cool history of this team that a lot of people have been a part of before I was even an idea, let alone covering this team every day.
You've been a beat reporter since 2017. Did you look back at your own writing to kind of think about like which stories you could expand or retell in a way that you weren't under the deadline initially, right? Like obviously the MLB.com stuff, you're filing each day. You got to get the story out. And this allows you with a book to kind of revisit it and expand on it, or maybe dig deeper in a way that you just don't have the luxury of time on the beat.
Exactly. And it takes me back to it's always a balance of needing to be writing every day. So there are some days where, yeah, I have some extra time. Maybe I have 1 or 2 stories in my back pocket, and that lets me work ahead on something bigger. The reality is that by this point of the season, I'm on flights, I'm worn out, you're trying to catch up, you're trying to cover news. Most days, I'm getting to the ballpark and I'm trying to tell the story that's in front of me that day. And that doesn't leave you much time. I'm always reminded of a more veteran writer than me on the beat, who kind of, in more colorful language, said one day, you know, anyone can write a good story if you have 3 weeks to work on it, type of thing. And it's a luxury to have that amount of time. The example I would use for that, now that you mention it, it has me thinking, is the Shohei Ohtani chapter and everything that went into his pursuit and that entire dramatic saga at the time. When that was all unfolding, and that was right around when I signed the contract for the book, so my stress was not low, but that was a great example of a time where I had to be writing news, context, some columns through that, but I needed to be on top of everything as it was happening. When I finally got to exhale and look back on that, I looked at it much differently. And it made me appreciate almost how strange and unique and fascinating it all was, because in the moment I was too close to it. I had to be reporting, I had to be watching what was happening on social media, on my phone, sources I was talking to. But looking back, it helped me appreciate how wild it was, and maybe it made me help appreciate what that experience was like for fans tracking it and the people who were emotionally invested in it. And that distance was pretty valuable. The other chapter I would say that about would be the COVID chapters, of which there are a couple. At the time, during the COVID years, I was concerned with getting my daily test and staying away from people and travel through the US, which was very stressful. When I look back on a lot of that, I felt like I was reading somebody else's work. Like I think I kind of emotionally detached from those years. So it was kind of fun to go back on those and look at them without a ticking clock and the pressure that comes along with that.
So when you go back on those, are you then reconnecting with some of the people that you were talking to at that point to kind of either or flesh out or get more quotes, or like how do you approach kind of like, and also I guess, I mean, this is a kind of further question to kind of some of the stories with like contemporaneous players is like, are you talking to them with two brains? Like, are you talking to them with the, like, I have to file a story right now, but I also want to parcel away some stuff for later for this book?
Yeah, that was a tough balance. And an example I'll use will be maybe to start with some of the alumni guys. I have been part of 20 different media events with Joe Carter, Cito Gaston, guys like that. And there were points where I'd have to decide, listen, asking Cito Gaston how it felt to win the World Series again is not going to help me get a better quote. I have quotes. I can use my time a little more wisely, and I'm also not a. I'm a big believer that I shouldn't wear people out just for the sake of doing interview after interview after interview. I like to be efficient with it, and I hope I'm smarter with it than I once was. But with the more contemporary interviews, like I think, for example, of that Otani chapter, going back again and talking to people who were involved, like John Schneider and Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro and some other folks, or those COVID year chapters, even going back to the couple of chapters about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. when he came up as a prospect and how special that moment was. I would try to make it really, really clear to people, okay, we're talking for a book right now. And number one, when people hear a book, they get a little scared. I learned that really early on, that the second people hear, I want to talk to you for a book, their mind goes to some great scandal is about to break. And it's not it. Once people relaxed a bit and realized that this book was just about the Blue Jays, it's a book about why people care about this team, I found that people were much more expansive. And when you go back through the Vladdy years, the COVID years, the Otani stuff, a lot of the more recent items in the book, there's always a paranoia around major league front offices or coaching staffs. And there's always a little hesitation with media. I won't say distrust, it's a person to person thing, but hesitation. And I completely understand that. If someone asked me why I wrote a bad story every night, I'd be annoyed too. I get it. But I think people were much more open. And I'd always try to do it with the understanding of, listen, this is for a book, and this is something I want to make that is permanent. This is not for a story today. I'm not trying to get a hit piece on you. I'm not trying to make you trend on Twitter tonight. This is for a story I'm working on. And I'd be very honest with people about what it was. I was not trying to surprise or blindside anyone. And people's guard came down a little bit, which was refreshing. And it allowed them to have some more long form conversations, knowing that it was a year down the road, maybe. So that people's trust in that was pretty interesting and really valuable.
So when you're asking the questions, you already have a sense of the shape of the segment or the piece in the book before you ask those questions?
Usually, yeah. Typically, I would, in terms of what the theme of the chapter would be. Or I think of, for example, the chapter called The Canada Problem, which is about players coming to Canada and whether that is a real issue or just a lazy US baseball media narrative. These days, it's much more the latter. I think players have learned what an incredible market Toronto is, especially when they are winning and spending money, which is all that matters. If the Blue Jays are spending money and winning, players will come here. And those were interesting conversations with players like George Springer and Kevin Gausman, because at the time when Springer signed his big deal, when Gausman signed his big deal, yeah, they would say the normal things. It's great to play for a country, blah, blah, blah. But everybody says that. Being able to get a little more into their actual decision-making process was really fascinating. And that took it a bit further. But I always kind of had an idea of the shape. And I was open to being surprised. I love being surprised. There's no better feeling in my job than when somebody, smiles and says, "Oh, I've got a story about that." But typically, I would know roughly where it was going in those chapters, and a lot of those players, executives, coaches, through Gibby and John Schneider, Charlie Montoyo, were really, really generous with their time on that.
Yeah, obviously, like you're trying to get this material at the same time you're trying to also get material for your beat reporting. Is it a big ask to ask for that extra time, or are they generally okay with providing that extra time?
I was more nervous of that than I should have been. I think. And I think what helped me is that I'm really conscious of that in my day-to-day work. And I think that's really important. I I'll say it carefully, but I'm a big believer that a lot of people waste subjects' time with certain interviews. And by that I mean, do you need 20 minutes with a guy or do you just need 5? When I am writing a story, for example, if I go to the ballpark next week after the All-Star break, let's say I'm writing a story about George Springer. It's going to be 800-word story. I probably need 4 quotes. One of those quotes I'll get pregame from John Schneider. One maybe I'll get from a teammate, and probably 2 of them I'll get from George Springer. If I'm going to talk to George Springer, I'll ask him a few questions, and as soon as I hear the second quote that I think is good, I can wrap it up. I don't need to waste 20, 25 minutes of his time trying to prove to him that I know baseball too. I don't think that's useful. So I've really tried to make a point very consciously over the years of not wasting people's time. And slowly, I think it comes up an understanding that if I'm asking for someone, it's because I really need it. And that's the highest compliment for me that I can get in my job is if I ask for Pete Walker or Vladdy or Bo, and they'll say, "Oh, it's Keegan. Okay, cool, quick. We'll do it quick," because they know that I just need 2 or 3 minutes for a very specific thing. I'm not going in and asking 30 questions hoping that they come up with a story for me, I guess is the best way to say it.
Does that
So
precision, sorry,
yeah.
does that precision help in terms of like for a book like this, knowing what you want and then like getting something out of someone, eliciting something specific?
Yeah, see, that's the interesting part because I tried consciously to be a bit more open in the book. And so to the first question, I found that people were more receptive because I don't think I'd burnt a lot of them out. If I needed John Schneider's time for 20 minutes, it's just, okay, when do you want to do it? If I needed Vladdy, if I needed somebody, since I had not worn them out, I think they knew that since I was asking for this, it was going to be used and it was going to be useful. So that was a good start. What I tried to do a little bit with the book interviews is leaving it a bit more open. And part of that was talking to people who were speaking about, maybe I was talking to Pat Henkin, or I was talking to somebody about Dave Stieb or Roy Halladay. All of those careers happened before I was on the Blue Jays beat. So that was my opening to say, and to be very blunt with people. I wasn't trying to sound smart. I would just very directly say, listen, I didn't cover this guy. I've read news stories, but like, what should I know about him? Is all the coverage of him from back in 1988 right? Was he really this type of dude? Did people get him wrong? Like, what should I know about him? A guy that wasn't around. What story, when you go to the bar with your buddies, do you tell about Dave Stieb? Do you tell about Carlos Delgado? And leaving it a little more open to people. So that was a cool opportunity to do that. And when people understood that it was for a book, not just a small story, I think they understood that a little more time would be needed as well. And, not an hour or two at a time, but maybe there were some 20-minute conversations, some 30-minute. And I think because I had not exhausted people or really bugged them too much, I think I was able to hit on most of them. I think it balanced out pretty well.
And a 20 from you, it sounds like is a pretty intense 20. If you're able to, pare things down to 5 for the purpose of writing an article, maybe you can, quadrupling that amount of time, you're maybe resting more from the interview subject than you would normally.
I would hope so. Yeah. I like to, I'm a big believer. Well, yes, I believe in the value and importance of media around a pro sports team completely. And I think some athletes do. I hope more do. But I'm also a big believer that I'm not the most important part of their day, man. They've got a million things to do, especially, managers, coaches in this day and age of baseball. They have 1,000 things to do. Watching John Schneider move through his day every day exhausts me. And now the number of people he has to interact with and, literally manage every single day. So whenever I go up to a player, for example, pregame, clubhouse opens at 3 p.m. If I need Vladdy, I'll walk up and I'll say, Vladdy, I'm looking for you for 2 minutes today. It can happen anytime. Some days he'll say, start, go right now. Some days he'll say, I need to stretch, I need to hit BP, can I meet you on the field? And I'm standing on the field 2.5 hours later when he is ready. But yeah, I know that the quick chat with me is not the number one thing on Vladimir Guerrero Jr.'s list most days. So I'm a big believer in uh, making it work any way we can.
Well, speaking of Vladdy, you tell his tale in kind of two halves. You have like kind of the past half and then the contemporary half. And I was curious about the decision to do that, to split it that way.
Yeah. That one was a big decision for me because I was not sure how to do it. And the question I've also gotten, which I think is related to this decision, is what about the current Blue Jays? And when this book came out, it's funny how the last month has changed things. When this book was about to come out, the Blue Jays were still around 500. And I got the question of, where's the Shapiro and Atkins chapter about how terrible this has been? And I said all along, if I wrote that chapter, they'd win the World Series and I would look like an idiot. Now, I think that made people make me want to write the chapter, but I don't believe that this current era is over right now. And we see that with Vladdy signing his extension and how good this team is right now. If I had written a big voice commanding chapter about this era of Blue Jays baseball, I'd be sitting here really nervous right now because it looks like they're about to do something really exciting this year. The Vladdy decision, number one, I wanted to take his prospect years and kind of freeze them in time. Similar idea I had to the COVID chapters, but two events that were very individual and singular that I wanted to freeze in time. I wanted the Vladdy prospect chapter to be completely detached from everything else. Because as Vladdy was coming up as a prospect in 2016, 17, and 18, that's when I was just starting on the Blue Jays beat. And I don't think I'll ever see anything like it again. Now, whether Vladdy turns into a very good player or a Hall of Famer in the big leagues, whatever, that doesn't matter. But as a prospect, I don't know if I'll ever see another 18-year-old in the minor leagues like Vladdy. It was unbelievable. So I wanted to freeze that in time. And then the 2021 Vladdy chapter, when he almost won MVP, if Shohei Ohtani was not Shohei Ohtani, he would have been the MVP of the league. I felt that was a way to kind of touch on that 21 team, which I thought was really special, but also involved some voices like Charlie Montoyo, like John Schneider and his experience with Vladdy, but to freeze Vladdy at his best. So now I have Vladdy the prospect and Vladdy at his best. 5 years from now, if I add to this book or write another or someday write a book about Vladdy, then the full story can come in. And maybe we're talking about him winning 3 World Series and an MVP. Maybe we're talking about 10 more disappointments in the playoffs. I don't know yet. But yeah, with each passing win, this last couple of weeks, as that winning streak got up to 10, there were a couple of times I thought, my God, I'm even more thankful now that I did not write the big, heavy-handed, this era of Blue Jays baseball has sucked story, because I think that would get outdated pretty soon here.
So that's something you're glad you didn't include. Is there anything you wish you could have included?
If I was to add more to this, I think I'd be really interested in some elements of executive team building, going deeper into Pat Gillick. Pat Gillick's a great example of the decisions that were made in this book. He's mentioned many times in it, and the moves and decisions Pat Gillick made are mentioned throughout. But if I was going to write the Pat Gillick chapter, I also wanted to write Anthopoulos, Scordash, the early years of this team, how it was all built. I would like to kind of nerd out a little bit on the team building elements. But if I'm going to do that, I'd want it to be a section, not just a chapter. So I made the decision to kind of pull back from that. The other element I'd love to expand on, and maybe this is just selfishness because it's my own world, but is the last section, the storytellers section, which covers how this team has been covered. In that section, there are chapters on Jerry Howarth and Tom Cheek, and Jerry was so generous with his time for this book. He's the best. There's a chapter on Allison Gordon, who was the first woman to cover a major league beat for the Toronto Star with the Blue Jays, and then Dan Schulman and Buck Martinez, which was one of my favorite chapters to do. I loved getting into the history of broadcasting and coverage for this team. I loved digging back in the old Toronto Star archives and seeing not just how the team was covered, but how much more open and interesting at times some players were with the media back in the day, before social media, before we got into the era of, clickbaity stories and headlines and tweets. That fascinated me. So I'd love to expand more on the media side, because I'm a big believer in the importance of that, and who has covered this team and who has written these stories before me, because there were 40 years of Blue Jays baseball before I showed up in the beat. And I want to keep some of that alive with a lot of the great writers that have covered this team.
Yeah, I feel like that Howarth section, you might have asked for 20 minutes and got like 20 hours in terms of recollections.
Absolutely. I love Jerry. And Jerry and Buck Martinez were two great assets for me in this book. Two great friends who I'm so blessed to have in my life. But since they have been around for everything, they were both very eager to go through the book. But whether it was Jerry or Buck, I would get an email at 1 a.m. or the next day saying, hey, this chapter about this guy here, that actually happened at this stadium, not that stadium. So they were two of my best editors as well, because they had been around for everything. But man, Jerry can still go. I tell you what, that was such a joy to talk to him.
Well, the franchise out now through Triumph Books by Keegan Matheson, with fact-checking by Buck Martinez and Jerry Howarth. Keegan, thanks very much for taking some time to talk about the book. Congrats on its release.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me. This has been such a thrill. I really do appreciate it.